Here we have a video about the fourth turning and the idea behind that. And we'll see how long this video lasts. It may only last one trimester and everything will change, but I'd like to put it out there and try and explain some of the things that Neil Howe in his book Generations is bringing about. And so remember, he's the one that thinks about history as a series of waves, and they come in a pattern of four. Okay? So we have some kind of crisis, and then everything sets in stone, and we have the new normal, and this is our distribution of people who believe what is normal. Most of the people are packed tightly in the middle, and they're pretty committed to the new cause, and so they build the nation, they build up civic institutions, they create all kind of new programs for government and how things are going to work socially and psychologically. This is what you think. It's very rigid. And so everyone is in the middle, and that becomes the norm. And when they go to choose presidents or Congress people, you really have to be in this band right here, okay? That's the area where policy is made, because if you pick an area outside of that, you have no chance of getting elected. I mean, you're going to get what? You know, these people out here, you're picking up 10% of the vote, and the other person gets 90%. So you really don't see, for the most part, anyone running in these types of categories. You see them mostly right here. And for the last, 40, 50 years, Democrats and Republicans have looked pretty much the same. Okay? I remember George Bush Jr. was bailing out the banks, and then he left as president, and Obama continued to bail out the banks. And he said, I'm going to be different. And there was no difference. So the presidencies really haven't changed much. There's a lot of surface differences, but as far as policy goes, pretty much we print more money than we take in taxes, and we create deficits, and we spend more than we have. And we've been doing that for decades. That's been the paradigm. That's been the normal. Okay? So, if you go back, every president since FDR has increased the national debt more than the previous president. So you might say, oh, Trump set the record for the most debts ever. Well, before him, Obama set the record for the most debts ever, and George Bush Jr. set the record for the most debts ever. And so every time we get a president, they just spend more and more and more. It's the same pattern. It's the normal that we have adopted, which does not mean it's good. That's why I'm using that example. Normal means what's accepted and what is practiced. It is not necessarily good or moral. It's just what is done. Okay? And so what happens is that over time, just like the seasons, these things can change. And so as we go through the four seasons, we go from winter to summer, back to winter again. Humans tend to go through four turnings. So in a fourth turning, it's kind of the winter. It is the time of destruction so that you can create things again. And so this is not set in stone. This is not the normal forever. This is just the normal until the next fourth turning, okay? And what happens is, in regard to this rigid belief that things have to be in this band right here, people start to rebel against it. That's what a fourth turning is. It's all about individualism. So individualism in the third turning, and that was sort of the Ronald Reagan years, Bill Clinton years, so the 1980s and 90s and into the 2000s, it was all about, be your own self. It's all about your individualism. You deserve a break today. That's what I remember the McDonald's commercial said. Everything was about you. You. And so individualism then leads to this idea that anything can be acceptable. Anything can be believed. I'll just make up whatever I want. And you've heard this in our news lately, where it's gotten to the point of there's facts, there's alternative facts, there's your facts, there's my facts. I hear people say things like, that's your truth. As if truth has no meaning. It's simply whatever you want to believe. Okay? And so because of that individualism that always happens in the third turning, it leads to the crisis in the fourth turning. And what happens to this normal distribution here is it flattens. And so everyone can believe what they want, and it tends to coalesce around four groups. And those four groups are represented right here. We'll call them the far left, the mid left, the mid right, and the far right, just because we have to call them something, and that's currently the way we identify things. And so if we talk about the left in America, this is usually liberal progressives. And if we talk about the right in America, that's usually, conservatives. And so those are really broad terms, and there's a lot of differentiation between them. But you'll notice that what we really have in our country right now, and this is what always happens in fourth turnings, is that you get multiple groups that all have a fairly strong amount of people in them. Okay? So right now, what has happened in America is we actually have four political parties. I know you're going to say there's only two, Democrat and Republican. No, both parties split in 2016. Okay? In 2016, you had Donald Trump over here on the far right. You had John McCain, Mitt Romney. They were sort of the old guard people, Mitch McConnell. These folks wanted things to stay right here, and the party split. And so you had a lot of people running for this mid-right position, and you had Donald Trump running over there. For the Democrats, you had Hillary Clinton running for this middle position from the left, and then you had Bernie Sanders running on the far left. And Bernie Sanders won the popular vote in the Democratic Party. It was only because of the rules of the Democratic Party that said someone who is of the insiders. They had a rule where they called them delegates. Bernie won the delegates, but then they called them super delegates. They were just individual people. There's about 400 of them in the Democratic Party that get extra vote. Like if they say they want this person, it doesn't really matter what the people say. And the Democrats sort of found out, is that really our rules? And so 2016, that's how Hillary got the nomination. Since then, the Democrats have changed that because the people really didn't like the elites running the show. The Republicans have always been the way of just whatever the people want. Well, it turned out the people wanted Donald Trump in the Republican Party. And to the chagrin of all the folks in the middle, Donald Trump was put forward as the Republican candidate. And quite frankly, the Democrats probably could have and should have put Bernie Sanders forward as their candidate over here. Okay? So what happened is we had Hillary Clinton running against Donald Trump, and the people over here that were bitter, that didn't get a vote for Bernie Sanders, protest voted for Trump, and we got Donald Trump elected. That was a pretty crazy thing happening. So in the past, when you had this normal distribution like this, there was no chance that people out here on the edges would ever win because they'd only get a tiny slice of the population. But Donald Trump won in 2016 because this whole curve flattened and everyone was pretty much equal. There was 25% in every party. And we have what we have going right now is four parties. Okay? So the press has very little nuance for these kind of things. In fact, the press has become not a reporter, but a player. And we'll talk about that when we get into press. But clearly there are press, news groups out there that represent each of these four and are working very hard to promote their person. So they are not reporters like they would have been in the 60s and 70s, Harvey Mudd, Walter Cronkite, who just got up there and said, today this happened. Now we have news agencies that are constantly saying tons of adjectives, like the evil people did this or the good people did that. Clearly not the accepted norm. Now we're just promoting or propagandizing for each of our groups. All right? So take it with a grain of salt. Every time you hear a news agency say, this happened, and they describe it, think about how many adjectives they put in there. The wonderful, amazing, stupendous people who did, or the evil, awful, terrible people who did that. If you have tons of adjectives, the more adjectives you have, the more you know it's not news. It's propaganda. Okay? So that's a kind of good rule of thumb. You got to remember what an adjective is. It's a descriptive word, all right? So think about that when you're listening to the news, and we'll get into that more later. All right. So what we have in America right now are really four political parties that have sort of coalesced. And if you can remember, I don't know how much you were paying attention, but Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton did not like each other. Okay? And the folks over here, Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, Nancy runs the House of Representatives, Chuck Schumer runs the Senate for the Democrats, they did not like Bernie at all. Okay? In fact, just recently they said, hey, Bernie, you're a senator, and would you please help nominate the person who hates you to be in Biden's cabinet? And he was just like, "Argh." And, his follower, Ocasio-Cortez, Andrea Ocasio-Cortez, and a lot of people just shorten that to AOC. She's vying for a lot of power right now, and she's really pushing herself as the leader of the far left, taking Bernie Sanders' place, because he's 81, 83, something like that. He's getting pretty old. And she asked for committee assignments in the House, and Nancy denied it. So she wanted to be on the Justice Committee, and Nancy said no. All right? So these two, even though they're both Democrats, and they're both supposedly on the same team, are fighting a lot. All right? You go over here and you see that Mitch McConnell in the Senate for the Republicans, he's the leader in the Senate for the Republicans. He goes along with what Trump does to a point, and then he's like, no, I don't like it. I'm not going to do that. Mitt Romney, also over there for the Republicans, he's absolutely against Donald Trump. And you say, yeah, but they're both Republicans. And no, just like over here for the Democrats, you've got this split, and they're fighting each other, okay? So what we really have in America today are four political parties. And whether it's correct or not, we call these people far left and far right. And what happens is these groups in the middle always use that as like some kind of insult. Oh, they're just far left. Oh, they're just far right. Okay? Because this curve is flattened, and these are the old guard. These are the people that have been around for a long time. They're used to this sort of thing. They have all the power. They have the influence. They have an awful lot of money. And they want to keep this system going. The problem is the American people are tired of it. They don't like it. Remember, the individualism has reared its head, and that's what people are looking for. And so they're moving to the edges. So what you have is a four-way civil war. Now, in most countries, they fight it out, right? And then that leads to a lot of chaos and destruction. The beauty of America is that most of the time we don't do that, except for that civil war we had. Most of the time we fight with lawyers, okay? People yell, people scream, I'll sue you, blah, blah, blah. We go to the courts, and then people accept it. So that's a much more civilized way of having this type of civil war. And we'll see who comes out of this as the victors. All right? So going forward, Donald Trump is out, but Ted Cruz from Texas, he's a senator there, he's really looking to assert himself and be the leader or champion of the people on the far right. Andrea Ocasio-Cortez is really looking to be the champion of the people on the left. So Donald Trump is moving out. Ted Cruz is moving into this area. AOC, Bernie is leaving, and she's moving in there. So you're seeing this rise to power of people on the edges, and that means anything goes in America. Okay? So these people are going to constantly be at war with the folks in the middle and with each other. Now, it's hilarious I'm making this video because just today, Ocasio-Cortez said Ted Cruz should resign because he's an embarrassment to America. And he laughed and said, you and your socialist buddies better take off. You resign. And it's pretty strong words. So already they're going back and forth. Okay? So some of the things you need to understand about this. In a fourth turning, every group competes for power on everything. Okay? Every group competes for power on everything. Because anything's possible in a fourth turning. Right? If one gets ahead of the others, the other three form an alliance to gang up on them. Okay? So if any one of these four starts to emerge as the more popular, the better, the more accepted one, the other three will instantly gang up and try and bash them down and take them out of that place, because they're all vying for power. So you'll see Republicans will team up against a Democrat, and it looks like it's Republican versus Democrat, but it's really just these two groups teaming up against another one. And then you'll be scratching your head like, well, why would the far left team up with the far right to go after someone in the middle? That's kind of weird, you know? And then suddenly they'll break with each other and start yelling at each other again. So that's what causes everything to be in flux. You never know where this is going to go. It's very hard to predict. However, if one of them weakens, like a pack of wolves, the other three move in for the kill. So if any one of these weakens, and usually historically it's these two in the middle, okay? If either one of these weakens, then the others move in and take them out, so that they can grab their share of the people and the votes and the acceptance and the popularity, and now it's me versus two. And when another one weakens, it's this one versus that one, and we're going to see which way we go. Okay? So that's really what decides things. It's not that one rises to the occasion and becomes popular. It's rather the other three are killed off, and we have the one left standing. All right. Which says something about the nature of humanity, doesn't it? Yeah. Small groups, or even singular people, can change history in this time. So I don't know who it's going to come out of the mists of time and history and be that champion. Is it going to be 2024, our president then? Is it going to be some civic leader? Is it going to be the leader of some technical institution like Twitter or Facebook or Google or something? You know, I don't know, but we could coalesce around a group like tech. We could coalesce around an individual like a politician. It's not limited just to civics. Small groups of people. And so it could be a Hitler. It could be a George Washington. All right? So this is when time in history can go into lots of different directions. And so if you are to choose a Hitler, well, that's going to be a big problem for your country for many years to come, maybe even decades. If you choose a George Washington, you know, that's going to affect your country down through time for many generations. All right? You know, Hitler, I'm pretty sure you know about him. He wasn't too good. He killed a lot of people. George Washington, they wanted to make him king, and he said, no, I'm just going to be the president. And then after 2 terms, he resigned. And they said, well, we thought you were going to be president for life. He said, no, 2 terms is enough for any man. That's too much power otherwise. So I will willingly just step down. And when this was reported to King George III, he stood up out of his throne. He said, my God, he'll be the most famous man ever if he does that. Because the king knew that was probably a really good thing to do and very popular with the people. But he also knew that as king, he wasn't going to do that. So he admired something in George Washington to do this selfless thing, and it has reverberated through the ages as the hero of our country. All right? So in these times of, you know, fluctuation, are you going to choose a hero? Or are you going to choose a villain? And that's always the question. You know, did the people choose what they wanted because they were inherently evil themselves? Or did they just have an aberration? You know, that Hitler came out of nowhere and we didn't really know what we were doing. I kind of think it's somewhere in the middle. So be very careful about what you choose, both for yourself and for your country, but also your society. What kind of values are you promoting? You know? What kind of values do we have? So who are we going to choose? I mean, because I'm a little worried because I'm a pessimistic person, but you know, I'm not seeing good signs. Like popular movies are like The Joker, The Purge. That doesn't look so good. The other problem when you go to choose people like this, you could choose someone very upstanding. But think about the system you choose. So what is this new normal going to be? What is our Constitution going to look like? Because that can determine which singular people get in. Okay? You might say, if you're in Russia, well, I love Trotsky. He was so amazing. He was such a nice guy. Yeah, but then you centralized power to this really nice guy, and then Lenin killed him and takes over. And now you've got a really bad guy with a lot of centralized power. So that's what our founding fathers looked at and said, okay, well, our Constitution should probably not centralize power, because the odds of us getting a psychopath could happen. So let's make it so even if a singular person tries to affect history, they're limited in some way. Okay? So that was the advice of our founding fathers, and that's the beauty of the Constitution. And that's why I'm showing this to you right now, because that's what we're studying. So what will our new normal be after this fourth turning? Probably around 2030. But between 2025 and 2030, we're going to be deciding, like, what's this all going to look like? Because there's a lot of things happening. Economically, it doesn't look good. The math doesn't add up. We can't borrow money infinitely. So that's going to be a reckoning here soon. And it might come all crashing down. We might have a new money. We might have online money. I mean, there's all kind of things that happen differently in a fourth turning. So geopolitically, countries are going to go to war in a fourth turning. That usually happens. We're already starting to see a lot of that. Like, the cracks are widening and anger is fomenting, and we could have wars all over the country, and new borders are drawn, and all kinds of things. And will America end up redrawing its own borders? Will we be the divided states of America? I don't know. Okay? Those are all kinds of options. Everything is on the table in the fourth turning. So you really need to choose wisely and choose well. Okay? So we'll talk about it more in class, and hopefully you'll have some questions.